Hey everyone, what I've got here is the Raspberry Pi 5. This single board computer has been out for about 2 or 3 months at this stage. I've had it for a few weeks. And right now it's sitting inside the official sexy red and white fan case. So what I'd like to do in this video is talk about the Raspberry Pi 5's features, its specifications. I'd like to show you what you get with the Essentials Kit bundle which I purchased, and then just show you setting up and give you a closer look at what is the latest Raspberry Pi on the market. The new Raspberry Pi 5 features a Broadcom quad-core 64-bit ARM Cortex A76 CPU, which runs up to 2.4 GHz. This new CPU is up to 3 times faster than the Raspberry Pi 4 CPU, and because of that extra power and performance, you will have to cool the Raspberry Pi 5 down using heat sinks and using fans. And the dimensions are a little bit different as well, so the Raspberry Pi 5 will not fit your Raspberry Pi 4 cases. The new Raspberry Pi is not just about this new quad-core CPU. We now have a power button. This is a little thing, but it's something which was lacking in previous versions of the Raspberry Pi. There's also support for dual monitors at 4K at 60Hz. Previously, only one monitor would support that. There's HEVC decoding at 4K at 60. There's a real-time clock. There's a UART debug port. There's built-in dual-band Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 5. And there's a PCI Express 2.0 interface which gives you support for M2 SSDs. The two USB 3.0 ports now support a higher total bandwidth, and there's many other features and specifications which we're used to seeing in a Raspberry Pi. This includes 2 USB 2.0 ports, Gigabit Ethernet, and the standard 40-pin header. The Raspberry Pi 5 was released in the last quarter of 2023, and as is common with new releases of Raspberry Pis, they're in great demand and in short supply when they first arrive. So my order took about 6 or 7 weeks to arrive, but it did finally arrive a few days before Christmas. Availability will depend on your region, but here in the UK, most retailers do seem to have the Raspberry Pi 5 in stock now. So if you do place an order, it should be delivered fairly quickly. The official Raspberry Pi website has a list of approved resellers around the world. I highly recommend checking the approved stores for your region to check availability and to compare prices between the different stores. Here in the UK, the Raspberry Pi 5 is retailing at around £60 for the version which has 4GB of memory and around £80 for the version which has 8GB of memory. There is no official Raspberry Pi 5 bundle, but most Raspberry Pi retailers do offer some sort of starter kit or essentials kit that provides you everything that you need to get started. I opted for Pimironi's bundle with the 8GB RAM version of the Raspberry Pi 5 with the Essentials kit, but it's worth noting that this bundle, and many other starter bundles like this, don't really save you any money. It's really about just buying a package that has everything that you need to get started. In my instance, I saved the grand total of 20 pence, and if you don't need a pre-installed micro SD card that has Raspberry Pi OS, or you don't need the HDMI cable, or you want to buy a different case, it is better buying everything separately. But for me, I was more than happy to just buy the Essentials kit because it had everything that I needed to get started with the Raspberry Pi 5. My Raspberry Pi 5 and Essentials kit came bundled with a micro SD to SD card adapter with a 32GB micro SD card which has Raspberry Pi OS pre-installed, an official micro HDMI to HDMI cable which is white in colour, 1 metre in length and has a male-to-male HDMI connection, and a white UK Raspberry Pi 5 official 27-watt power supply. This power supply is white in colour, is 1.2 metres in length, delivers a maximum of 5.1 volts or 5 amps, and it charges your Raspberry Pi using a Type-C connection. The bundle also contains a Raspberry Pi 5 official case with fan. The top of this case is removable, and underneath you will see the fan that is clipped into the middle part of the case. The official case also comes with 4 rubber feet for the case and a little heatsink for your Raspberry Pi 5's CPU. Finally, we have the Raspberry Pi 5. It comes packaged with a card that tells you what not to do with the Pi 5 and a safety and user guide which I doubt anyone will actually read. The most important thing here is of course, the 8GB RAM version of the Raspberry Pi 5. As long as you have all essential components to run your Pi 5, you can start setting things up. The first thing I did was insert my microSD card, which had Raspberry Pi OS pre-installed. As with previous versions of the Raspberry Pi, the microSD card slot can be found at the bottom of the Pi 5, and to insert the microSD card correctly, all you have to do is ensure the microSD card text and branding is facing you. I then put the 4 rubber feet onto the bottom of that sexy red and white official Raspberry Pi 5 case. Next, I put the little heatsink that is provided onto the Broadcom CPU that sits in the middle of the Pi 5. I then placed the Pi 5 into the bottom half of the official case, which is the red half, and then removed the plastic protector that sits on top of the fan port. This allowed me to connect the case fan directly to the Pi 5's board, and then attach the final 2 parts of the case on top. Once you've connected the power supply and micro HDMI cable, you can power the Raspberry Pi 5 on. I also connected a USB keyboard and USB mouse to my Pi 5, but if you prefer, you can instead use a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. When the Pi 5 first powers on, the case fan should spin, but do not be concerned if the fan stops spinning, as according to the official Raspberry Pi docs, the fans do not need to spin if the CPU's temperature is below 50 degrees Celsius. When your Pi 5 loads up, you'll be presented with the Raspberry Pi OS setup screen. This process lets you configure your country, language and time zone, create a user and password, connect to Wi-Fi if you wish, and select Chromium or Firefox as your default browser. It also lets you update the Raspberry Pi OS software, but I encountered an error at this stage. The Raspberry Pi OS, which we all know and love, will then load up. If you haven't used it before, I highly recommend navigating through the menus, testing the browser, watching some videos, and more. My Pi 5 did not update Raspberry Pi OS during the setup process, but even if yours did, it's prudent to run the update commands to ensure that everything has been correctly updated. To update Raspberry Pi OS, all you have to do is run the command sudo apt update. Once that is complete, enter the command sudo apt full-upgrade. Performing both of these steps will ensure that your Raspberry Pi OS installation is up to date. I have not did a lot of testing with the Pi 5 so far, but one thing I did notice was that I was only able to play back YouTube videos at 1080p, not 4K. From the discussions I've seen online, this appears to be a limitation with the Pi's encoding capabilities, but there is hope we may see 4K playback in the future. One thing which seems to have confused people online is the fact that in addition to the official case with fan, there is an official cooler for the Pi 5 called the Active Cooler, which is available for around $5. The Active Cooler is a single piece solution that features a large aluminium heatsink, pre-applied thermal pads and an integrated blower fan. The official Raspberry Pi 5 docs highlight that thermals are significantly lower if you use the Active Cooler, and I have no doubt that many high-quality third-party cooling solutions will also reduce CPU temperatures better than the fan case. To summarise, the Active Cooler will cool your Pi 5 better than the fan that is included with the official case, as it offers better thermals, and it's more practical as it integrates with most Pi 5 cases too. Thankfully, the Active Cooler fan is compatible with the official fan case. All you have to do is pop out the fan bracket, which is something Jeff Geerling has demonstrated on his website. Another thing that did catch my attention was standby power consumption. When the Raspberry Pi 5 was powered on, the Pi would draw around 5 watts when no apps were launched. However, when my Raspberry Pi was powered off, it was still consistently drawing around 1.5 watts, which, for a Raspberry Pi, is quite a lot. Thankfully, Jeff Geerling has posted instructions online on how you can reduce standby consumption to only 0.01 watts. So here I am with the Raspberry Pi 5, and what I'd like to do in this section is just give you a closer look at this little mini computer. And what I'll do initially actually is take the top of the fan case off, because this white casing is reflecting off my lights and you can't really see it properly. So what I've got here is the Raspberry Pi 5, and you can see we've got Gigabit Ethernet, USB 3.0, USB 2.0. We've got the micro SD card here. We've got the power button there, power, micro HDMI. It's quite a simple device, very, very easy to use, and I can show you how easy it is to use right now. So I've got a USB mouse and keyboard, which I will put that in just now. And then I've also got power, and I've got micro HDMI. One thing I'll note is that I did try a few USB Type-C cables, and some of them do seem to be incompatible, or at least I'm getting an error message saying that it's not going to give the full power. So I've went back to using the official power supply. One thing you'll note there as well is that by default, this just powers on automatically. I haven't done anything, it's just started powering on. It's worth noting though that you can disable that if you wish. You can, adjust the settings so that it doesn't just power on like that. You can make it so that you have to push the power button. But by default, when you connect power, like I just did there, it will start powering on. So here we are at Raspberry Pi OS. I don't want to go over this again. I've kind of touched upon this earlier in the video, but what I will say is that my experience of this so far is that, it's not as quick as my main computer, obviously, but in comparison to the Pi 4, I had the Pi 400 myself, this feels a lot snappier. It really does feel a lot quicker than it did before. Right, what was my last session? Let's restore it and see what it comes up with. Oh, it's the YouTube video of earphones. So it really does feel a lot snappier than it did before. Just navigating the web, just browsing generally, using it, it does seem a lot quicker before. And that's what they say on the official specs page as well, that you can expect about 2 to 3 times more performance. But as you saw there, this little computer is super quick to load up. It can handle video quite well. There does seem to be an issue with encoding 4K video, but 1080p video seems to be running perfectly. I've messed about with some command lines stuff, etc. But at this stage, I haven't tested a lot. And it's important to note that this is not a complete review. I've not did extensive testing on thermals, on power, or anything like that. But yeah, just from a simple usability point of view, Raspberry Pi OS seems very quick on the Raspberry Pi 5. So what I'm going to do now is just shut this down, and we'll switch over. Come on, turn off. There we go. I'll switch back over here. And you see the fan stop spinning there. And then I'm going to just take all those cables off, just to give you a closer look at everything. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the size. And the dimensions are different from the Pi 4, and they're different from the 3B, which I have here. One thing I noted right away, because I went from the 3B to the Pi 400 to the Pi 5. One of the things I always loved about the 3B was that you had a full HDMI connection, because I detest micro HDMI connections, because the little, what's this one here? The little micro HDMI connection here, they always end up snapping at one point or another. So I'm just not a fan of them. I prefer full HDMI, but I know why they switched from full HDMI to 2 micro HDMI in the 4, and then obviously in the 5 as well. It just makes more sense. You've got, instead of having 1 HDMI, you can have 2 micro HDMI. You can connect more monitors. It's more practical. I get it. It's a small device. Sacrifices do have to be made, but it's worth noting that the version 3B did used to have a full HDMI. What we've got here is a 3.5mm connection. That was in the Pi 4. It's gone. Some people might not be happy about that. It's not a big deal for me, because you can buy Pi hats for things like that, and it's not something I would use anyway, because I would get audio via the HDMI connection. But perhaps for some people, for some use cases, they would want that to be there, but it is gone. It's a kind of simpler setup this time now, with 2 micro HDMI, no 3.5mm connection. If I take this off just now, if I can get my finger in here, you can see that the fan is connected here, and you can see the Raspberry Pi 5. And it's a very simple computer. There's not a lot to it. I mean, you get it like this, You can buy it like this without the case. You can buy your own case. And I will be buying other cases. I will be buying the active cooler. But if you just buy the Raspberry Pi 5, 4GB or 8GB of memory, you don't buy any kind of bundle, that's essentially what you would get. Just the actual single board computer, the circuit board, that's all you would get. And it's a very simple computer, but it's amazing how flexible these little computers are. Now, as I said, I've not done a huge amount of testing just now. In comparison to older Pis, you've got so much more performance here. It's about 2 to 3 times more performance from what they say. That obviously does depend on what application you're using, what your use case is. It's also worth noting as well that Raspberry Pis aren't the only solution in town anymore. You know, they kind of paved the way for single board computers being popular, and we're on 5th generation now. But Raspberry Pis have got a little bit more expensive, so there are other solutions out there. This is more powerful, it's more flexible in many ways, but I mean, just look at the size difference between them as well. I mean, just look at the size of the Raspberry Pi 5 in comparison. But you will see a lot of people doing these comparisons between the Raspberry Pi 5, the Zima board, the Orange Pi 5, the Rock range as well. Those computers they're not that much more expensive, but they can be about 2 to 3 times more powerful than a Pi 5. So, depending on your use case, you might gravitate towards a different single board computer. What I will say though is that where Raspberry Pi always wins is the community. You know, with a solution such as this, there's a few official accessories. There's pretty much no third-party accessories. There is a good user community, but you're kind of on your own in a way. You know, you've got the official OS, you can install different Linux versions, but with Raspberry Pi, it's so different because you can think of any wacky use case for your Raspberry Pi, and there will be an answer out there, you know, for the questions that you have. And there will also be accessories for it. There are Raspberry Pi accessories all over the place. Official Raspberry Pi shops, eBay, Amazon, they're everywhere. And that's one of the best things about the Raspberry Pi devices is that there's so many different use cases for it. There's so many wacky applications for it. They're so flexible. They're so small and they're so power efficient as well. You know, as far as bang for your buck, how much power you get per watt, Raspberry Pis are excellent. So at this stage, I've just been tinkering with the Raspberry Pi 5. I've been messing about with Raspberry Pi OS, but my first impressions of this so far are positive. This seems like a really fantastic little single board computer, and I'm really looking forward to playing around with it, getting different hats, and just, you know, buying the active cooler, buying the SSD hat, etc., and just trying different things to see what I can use this for in different ways that I can adapt this for how, you know, I use things in the house, networking, etc. So yeah, overall, my first impressions of this are very positive. So there you have it, guys, the Raspberry Pi 5. I hope you now have a better understanding as to what this single board computer is all about. If you are interested in Raspberry Pis, please do subscribe to my channel. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be buying some different accessories for this. I'm going to be testing different software, and I'm going to be delving deeper into the world of Raspberry Pi and pushing out some videos on it. So if it interests you, please do subscribe. Please do check out the description area below this video as well. I've got links to the official website, articles, etc. Everything that I've referenced is down there. And what I'd also say as well is, you know, do your research. Check other videos on YouTube on the Raspberry Pi 5 and on other single board computers. I'm a big fan of this. My first impressions of this are positive, but there's a lot of different options out there, and there's no point spending $100 or so on this if it's just going to sit there and gather dust. It's important for you to look at other videos, look at other reviews, and, you know, help you make an informed decision as to whether this is something that you should be buying. There's a lot of great content out there on YouTube about the Raspberry Pi 5, so check them out. Check out the reviews, the analysis, all the thermal tests. Check them out, and you'll get a better understanding as to what this can do and whether it's something you do want to buy. As always, thanks for watching the video, and if you get any questions, please do post a comment below. And until next time, take care.